Thank you very much. So I'm going to start this discussion by talking about economics. If we're talking about reinventing the economy, then economics should contribute to that discussion. And yet there have been various mentions of economics by different speakers which suggest that there's a sense that we are not well served by what economics has to offer. Now, I want to start off by trying to make it clear that what people often mean when they say economics is what I would refer to as mainstream economics. This is the standard, dominant way of doing economics. And it's so dominant that many people think that that's it, that there's nothing else. Well, in fact, there are several other ways of doing economics. There's a whole range of them, of approaches, which have been around for a very long time. And it's a significant problem that these different approaches often don't get a hearing in public discourse about policy. So I just want to say a few things about economics and how economics might be able to contribute more constructively to the kind of policy discussions that have been going on here today. And we have to start with mainstream economics because it's the dominant approach and it's the one we all have to address. Now, there are well-rehearsed problems with mainstream economics. The assumptions that are made are unrealistic. Now, any theory has to make assumptions, but there are particular issues that we take with some of the assumptions of mainstream economics. But it also excludes a lot of subject matter that we're actually interested in. It doesn't provide a basis for talking about power in markets or power in the economy. It doesn't allow us to talk about processes rather than outcomes. There's a whole range of things which have been talked about here today, which cannot be addressed by the mainstream approach. But why has it been so dominant? And I think there are two features of mainstream economics that I'd really like to stress, which I think explain why it's succeeded in dominating the discipline and dominating the discourse, aside from politics and ideology, which is a sort of larger arena in which to talk about this. The first thing is that it presents itself as value-free, that there are no value judgments within economics. This is the way in which mainstream economics presents itself. Mainstream economists are technical experts who provide information, and then we discuss it in terms of our different ideas and ideologies and ideals about how we would like to see society develop. Well, it's not value-free. This is a pretense. There are values embedded in mainstream economics which feed through everything. I mean, if we take issues of income distribution, which are important, mainstream economics focuses on the idea that factors of production, including labour, are paid their marginal product if markets are working properly. People are paid according to what they contribute to society. And the implication is that this is right. You know, notions of justice can't be addressed directly here, but it's implicit in the idea that people are paid their marginal product, that this is just. People are paid for what they produce. But of course, what factors are paid, and particularly in the labour market, depends very much on power relations. And that creates a particular income distribution. So not only is there a pretense that it's value-free, but mainstream economics actually makes it really difficult for us to tease out what kind of value judgments are embedded, and therefore try and figure out whether we're prepared to accept that set of values or not. And the second feature of mainstream economics I'd like to emphasise is that this is part and parcel of presenting the mainstream approach as being scientific. We know that mainstream economics is normally presented in the form of mathematical models. A lot of very sophisticated mathematics is used, a lot of talent is devoted to developing these things. But the position is taken that this is scientific, and it's more scientific than anything else. And this is a way of excluding other ways of doing economics. If an argument is developed and is not turned into something that fits within the mathematical modelling framework, then it's not counted as proper economics. I mean, there's a lot of psychological theory about what people see. People will recognise something that makes sense to them in terms of how they understand economics, and something that doesn't fit that doesn't count and isn't seen. So it's not necessarily willful exclusion, it's just exclusion on the basis that this isn't economics. Now, as I operate outside the mainstream, as do many, I see various faces in the audience here who operate outside the mainstream. There is, in fact, a large community of economists outside the mainstream. And much of the presentation of these alternative approaches is presented under the banner of pluralism. This is the idea that it not only is it good to tolerate a range of approaches, but it's actually good to foster a range of approaches so that any complex policy issue will benefit from expertise coming from different perspectives, different set of value judgments, because you can't keep them out of economics, but also different types of analysis. And most people within this kind of community would also support the idea of pluralism of method. That means using a range of methods, not focusing solely on mathematical models, but drawing on a whole other range of methods. And different groups like different ranges of methods. The different groups, incidentally, I should explain, arise out of different understandings of how the economy works. So you have some groups who focus on the individual entrepreneur, and market processes, others that look at class, others that look at institutions. It's just a matter of how you take this complex social structure, what it is you understand about the way that works, and therefore how you analyse it. Now, there is a growing community, but how is it possible to challenge the mainstream? The mainstream is very good at adapting, and the subject matter of the mainstream has been moving with the times, but is always held back by that insistence on mathematical modelling of a particular sort, that really constrains what mainstream economics can actually do. Now, there is force in numbers. There are a lot of organisations now that are promoting pluralism. There's the World Economics Association. There's ICAPE, which is an umbrella body of about 40 international organisations that want to promote pluralism in economics. And there's INET, which has contributed to funding this conference. Anatol Koletsky spoke about it this morning. Well, one of the things that INET does is provide funding for research which wouldn't normally be funded under the normal Research Council operations. Because when it comes down to it, actually, a lot of what determines what happens within economics is what is funded. You have to be able to persuade a funding body that the research you're doing is worthwhile, and therefore it's really important to have bodies which are going to recognise research outside the mainstream. Now, actually thinking in terms of the Scottish context, at the moment, university research is funded through the Scottish Higher Education Funding Council. Now, all the Scottish universities go through a research excellence framework exercise every few years, where peers judge research and that determines funding. But of course, the peers judging the research are the ones in economics tend to be people who represent the mainstream approach, and so it becomes a sort of circular phenomenon. But SHEFCA can choose how to allocate the funding. And actually, it's probably quite a while ago now, maybe 15 years ago, there was a recognition that there wasn't enough research in the Scottish economy, because real research on a particular economy didn't fit with the pecking order of what's the best kind of research to do. It involved looking at that particular context rather than producing general models. So SHEFCA actually funded a network to support research on the Scottish economy. Well, if they can do that, then there are other possibilities as well. Now, I'd just like to say a few words about education. I mean, what I've been talking about so far is the kind of research that would feed into the kind of policy debate that's been happening here. But we also need to look to future generations. I mean, the fact is, it's very difficult to persuade somebody who's made their career in mainstream economics that they should switch to something else. It happens, but it's really the next generation that holds the key. And what's so encouraging just now is the number of student organisations who themselves, off their own bats, are demanding that they be taught in a pluralist way. They want to be taught in the form of debate, so they get an idea of what the different approaches are, how they might themselves decide how to address them. The conference next week in New York of I can't remember, it's some large number of student organisations which have formed themselves and have got together in order to pursue these ideas. And again, INET is playing a really important role here. And I'm pretty sure they're heavily involved in supporting this conference in New York. They've been supporting a lot of these student groups. I should mention, of course, that there's one here in Glasgow, a really good group of students here in the economics department that are taking an active part in this movement. But INET's not only supporting and facilitating these groups getting together and taking things forward, they're actually supporting these efforts in a practical way by building up teaching materials. I mean, I suggest if you're interested, you have a look at the INET site. It's ineteconomics.org. There are lots of teaching materials, lots of short-term online courses. There's a long online course on money that you can join in with. So this is a very sort of concrete way of building up the future of economics. So hopefully with these developments, economics will be able to contribute more and more to constructive policy discussion. But in the meantime, I'd just like you to be aware there are lots of us out there. Don't be fooled that economics is only mainstream economics. There are lots of us out there who are interested in doing economics in a different way and anxious to help. Thank you.